November 5, 1940, mid-Atlantic, 755 nautical miles south-southwest of Reykjavik. Convoy HX-84, 37 merchant ships carrying fuel, food and munitions to Britain. No Royal Navy warship escort, just one ship standing between those merchantmen and the open ocean. HMS Jervis Bay, a converted passenger liner with 7 old 6-inch guns, no armor, no fire control director, and a top speed of 15 knots. Then on the horizon, a silhouette no convoy escort wanted to see. Admiral Scheer, a German pocket battleship carrying 6 11-inch guns, 8 5.9-inch guns, 80 millimeters of belt armor, and a top speed of 28 knots. Captain Edward Fogarty Fegen looked at the mismatch and made his decision in seconds. He turned his unarmored liner directly toward the battleship. He ordered the convoy to scatter. He knew he was going to die. He needed to buy his convoy time. 22 minutes. That is how long Jervis Bay lasted, and those 22 minutes saved over 1,000 merchant seamen. To understand why a passenger liner was fighting a pocket battleship in the North Atlantic, you need to understand how desperate Britain's situation was in the autumn of 1940. France had fallen. The U-boat campaign was accelerating. Between June and October of that year, more than 270 Allied ships had been sunk in the North Atlantic. Merchant ships were going down at a rate of 66 per month. Britain depended entirely on convoys crossing the Atlantic for food, fuel, and war material. Without those convoys, the war was lost within months. The Royal Navy did not have enough warships, not nearly enough. The fleet needed cruisers and destroyers for convoy escort, but it also needed them for the Mediterranean, the home fleet, and a dozen other commitments stretching from Norway to the Indian Ocean. The numbers simply did not work. There were too many convoys and too few escorts. For the most dangerous stretch of the Atlantic crossing, the mid-ocean gap beyond the range of shore-based escorts, many convoys had no Royal Navy protection at all. The Admiralty needed something to fill the gap. Their solution was born from necessity, not choice. The Admiralty requisitioned 56 passenger liners from merchant shipping companies across Britain and the Commonwealth. These ships were brought into naval dockyards, repainted grey, fitted with old guns, crewed with a mix of Royal Navy regulars, Royal Naval reservists, and Merchant Navy volunteers, and sent to sea as armed merchant cruisers. The concept was straightforward. A large ship with guns could at least challenge a U-boat on the surface, deter an armed merchant raider, or provide some show of force against enemy warships long enough for a convoy to scatter. The concept was also, by any honest assessment, close to suicidal against anything heavier than a destroyer. These converted liners had no armor plating. Their hulls were built to commercial standards, not naval specifications. Thin steel plate designed to keep out seawater, not shell splinters. A 6-inch shell would pass through both sides of an armed merchant cruiser without slowing down. An 11-inch shell would detonate inside the hull with catastrophic effect, the blast ripping through compartments that lacked the subdivision and damage control systems built into proper warships. They had no direct-to-fire control systems. Each gun was aimed and fired independently by its own crew, without the centralized range-finding and coordination that made proper warships accurate at long range. Their guns were typically late 19th century vintage 6-inch weapons, adequate against surfaced submarines or lightly armed raiders, but effectively useless against armored warships at combat ranges. The maximum effective range of these old guns was well under half the range at which a pocket battleship's 11-inch weapons could engage accurately. Their freeboard was enormous, the tall sides of a passenger liner presenting a target profile visible at extreme range that any gunnery officer would find impossible to miss. Sailors called them Admiralty-made coffins. 15 of the 56 were sunk during the war. The name was earned. HMS Jervis Bay was typical of the breed. Built in 1922 by Vickers Limited at Barrow-in-Furness for the Commonwealth Government Shipping Line, she was a 14,164-ton passenger liner designed to carry emigrants from Britain to Australia. She had spent her peacetime career crossing the Indian Ocean with families seeking new lives in the Southern Hemisphere. In August 1939, the Admiralty requisitioned her. 7 6-inch guns dating from the late 19th century were bolted to her decks. A crew of 254 men was assembled, drawn from the Royal Navy, the Royal Naval Reserve, and the Merchant Navy. The white ensign was hoisted. Jervis Bay became a warship in name. In capability, she remained a passenger liner with guns. Her specifications told the story plainly: 14,164 gross registered tons, top speed 15 knots, 7 6-inch guns in single mountings with no centralized fire control, no armor protection of any kind, no torpedo tubes, no radar, no depth charges. Against a surfaced submarine or an armed merchant raider, Jervis Bay's guns gave her a fighting chance. Against a pocket battleship, her guns could not even reach the enemy at the ranges. The enemy's weapons were effective. Admiral Scheer was everything Jervis Bay was not. A Deutschland-class heavy cruiser, she was designed from the keel up as a warship built to destroy commerce and fight off any cruiser fast enough to chase her. Displacement 11,550 tons standard, 15,420 tons at full load, length 610 feet overall, beam 70 feet, 8 MAN 9-cylinder double-acting diesel engines producing 54,000 shaft horsepower, top speed 28.3 knots, range 9,100 nautical miles at 20 knots. Armament was devastating. 6 11-inch guns in 2 triple turrets, 1 forward, 1 aft. 8 5.9-inch guns in single turrets as secondary armament, 6 4.1-inch anti-aircraft guns, 8 37mm anti-aircraft guns, 10 20mm anti-aircraft guns, 8 21-inch torpedo tubes, 2 Arado float planes for reconnaissance, belt armor 80mm, turret armor up to 150mm, conning tower armor 150mm, and critically, Admiral Scheer carried radar, a secret known to only a few of her crew. Every salvo from Scheer's main battery delivered roughly 2.5 tons of high explosive. Jervis Bay could not have stopped those shells with any armor she possessed, because she possessed none. Captain Theodore Kranke sailed Admiral Scheer from Kiel on October 27, 1940. She slipped through the Denmark Strait into the open Atlantic on the night of October 31. Her mission was commerce raiding, to intercept and destroy Allied merchant ships on the convoy routes. German naval intelligence from the Bedienst Radio Intercept Service identified convoy HX-84 sailing east from Halifax. Kranke set an intercept course. On November 5, Kranke launched his Arado float plane at 9:40 in the morning. The Observer reported a convoy of merchant ships steaming eastbound. No warship escort observed. The intervening distance was roughly 90 nautical miles. Kranke increased to 23 knots to intercept before nightfall. Before reaching the convoy, Scheer encountered the independent cargo liner Mopan. Kranke stopped her, took her 76 crew as prisoners, and sank her. This process consumed nearly 2 hours. It was a decision that cost Kranke precious daylight, and it gave the convoy time it did not know it needed. By late afternoon, Admiral Scheer was closing on the convoy. At approximately 4:45, the merchant ship Rangatiki sighted a warship approaching from the north. The alarm went through the convoy. Captain Fegen aboard Jervis Bay challenged the approaching vessel with signal lamps. Scheer's signals officer attempted a bluff, repeating Jervis Bay's own recognition codes back at her. The deception failed within minutes. Fegen understood the situation instantly. A pocket battleship against an unarmed convoy. His ship, the only thing between them. He had told his officers when he first took command of Jervis Bay what he would do if this moment came. If confronted by the enemy, he said, he would take them in as close as he possibly could. He ordered the convoy to scatter. 37 merchant ships began turning away in all directions, each captain choosing his own course, spreading across the grey Atlantic as fast as their engines could drive them. Then, Fegen ordered Jervis Bay to lay smoke floats and turn directly toward Admiral Scheer. Full speed, 15 knots against 28, 7 6-inch guns with no fire control against 6 11-inch guns with radar direction. An unarmoured passenger liner against an 80mm belt. Every man aboard Jervis Bay knew the arithmetic. Jervis Bay opened fire as she closed the range. Her guns fired often, but the range was too great. Without direct-to-fire control, each gun aimed independently. Most shells fell short. One round landed close enough to send spray across Scheer's deck, but no hits were scored. The 6-inch guns simply could not reach effectively at the distance Scheer chose to fight. Scheer's response was precise and devastating. The 5th salvo struck Jervis Bay's forward superstructure. The foremast was shot away, The gun director was wrecked. The rangefinder was destroyed. The gunnery transmitting station, which coordinated fire between the guns, was knocked out completely. All cables carrying electrical power and telephone connections to the gun positions were severed in a single hit. In one stroke, Jervis Bay lost any ability to coordinate her gunnery. The battle had barely begun, and she was already finished as a fighting unit. But she kept coming. Fegen held course toward the enemy. Individual gun crews reverted to local control, aiming and firing independently, hurling shells at a target they could barely range. Scheer brought all her heavy, medium, and light guns to bear. Each salvo that struck the unarmored liner tore through thin commercial plating as if it were paper. Fires erupted across the forward portside. Twisted girders and jagged steel replaced what had been a ship's structure. Casualties mounted with every hit. A shell struck the bridge. Captain Fegen's right arm was shattered. Wounded and bleeding, he remained at his post, directing the ship's course toward the enemy, refusing to break off. The men around him were dying. Officers were killed one after another. Fegen continued giving orders, holding the ship on course, driving his burning liner closer to the pocket battleship. Another shell hit the bridge area. This one killed him. But Jervis Bay did not stop. Even with her captain dead, her bridge shattered, and her guns firing blind, the crew kept fighting. Sailors climbed the damaged mast to nail a replacement white ensign after a shell had shot the original away. Gun crews continued loading and firing on local control, knowing their shells were falling short, knowing it made no tactical difference, knowing the only thing that mattered was time. Every minute Scheer spent destroying Jervis Bay was a minute the convoy used to scatter into the gathering darkness. 22 minutes after the first German salvo, Jervis Bay was ablaze from bow to stern. Her guns were silent. Her engine room was flooding. The order to abandon ship was given by the senior surviving officer. She rolled over and sank, taking 187 of her crew to the bottom. Captain Fegen, 33 officers, and 156 ratings died with the ship. The cold of the November Atlantic began killing the survivors in the water almost immediately. Hours later, the Swedish merchant ship Stureholm, a neutral vessel sailing independently, made the decision to turn back. Captain Sven Olander brought his ship into the debris field and rescued 68 men from the freezing sea. 3 of those survivors later died of their wounds. One of the survivors was Guy Byam, who went on to cover the war as a BBC correspondent before being killed during an air raid over Germany. If you are finding this account of Royal Navy sacrifice compelling, subscribing takes a second and helps the channel produce more content like this. Those 22 minutes changed everything for convoy HX-84. By the time Scheer finished with Jervis Bay, darkness was falling across the Atlantic. The convoy had scattered in every direction. 37 ships had become 37 individual targets spread across hundreds of square miles of open ocean. Cranker gave chase, using star shells and searchlights to hunt in the dark. He caught 5 merchant ships. The Kenbanehead, a small freighter, fired back with her own guns before being sunk with 24 of her crew killed. Beaverford, Maiden, Truillard, and Fresno City were also caught and destroyed. But 32 ships escaped into the night. Over 1,000 merchant seamen survived because Fegen had bought them time. The strategic arithmetic was stark. Without Jervis Bay's sacrifice, Scheer would have reached the convoy in daylight, with hours to spare. A pocket battleship, loose among 37 slow merchant ships in daylight conditions, would have caused catastrophic losses. Cranker could have methodically worked through the convoy, sinking ship after ship. The loss of an entire convoy's cargo, the fuel, the food, the munitions, would have been a blow Britain could barely absorb in November 1940, when the island's reserves were at their lowest. Captain Fegen was awarded the Victoria Cross posthumously. The citation recorded that he had fought his ship against overwhelming odds to protect his convoy. It was one of the most extraordinary awards of the war. A passenger liner captain who charged a battleship with guns that could not reach it, knowing he would die, to buy minutes for merchant ships to run. Compared Jervis Bay to what she faced. 14,000 tons against 15,400. 15 knots against 28. 7 6-inch guns without director control against 6 11-inch guns with radar. no armour against 80mm of belt and 150mm on the turrets and conning tower. The mismatch was absolute and total. There was no scenario in which Jervis Bay could have damaged sheer meaningfully. Fegen knew this. His decision was not tactical, it was sacrificial. Every minute he drew Shear's fire was a minute his convoy lived. The armed merchant cruiser concept represented Britain's willingness to send men to sea in ships they knew were inadequate, because the alternative was to leave convoys completely undefended. Of the 56 liners converted to armed merchant cruisers, 15 were lost to enemy action during the war. Rawalpindi had already gone down fighting 2 German battlecruisers in November 1939. Voltaire was sunk by the raider Thor. Transylvania was torpedoed. Each loss took hundreds of men. The concept was brutally expensive in lives, but it filled a gap that nothing else could fill in 1939 and 1940, before enough corvettes, frigates, and escort destroyers came into service. By 1942, the surviving armed merchant cruisers were being withdrawn from escort duty and converted to troop transports, a role far better suited to their size and speed. The arrival of Flower-class corvettes, River-class frigates, and American destroyers transferred under Lend-Lease finally gave the Royal Navy enough proper escorts to protect the Atlantic convoys. The age of the armed merchant cruiser was ending, but in November 1940, there was nothing else. The action against Admiral Scheer had consequences beyond the survival of 32 merchant ships. The Royal Navy assembled 5 task forces, totaling 2 battleships, 3 battlecruisers, an aircraft carrier, 5 cruisers, and 15 destroyers to hunt for Scheer. The search disrupted convoy schedules across the North Atlantic for weeks. Harbours became congested, cargo deliveries were delayed. The economic damage caused by Scheer's mere presence in the Atlantic exceeded the tonnage she actually sank. After Scheer's raiding cruise, during which she steamed over 46,000 nautical miles and sank 17 merchant ships, totaling over 113,000 gross registered tons. The German High Command drew lessons. The loss of Bismarck in May 1941 reinforced the conclusion. Capital ships were expensive and vulnerable. U-boats were cheaper and sank more tonnage. Hitler ordered that battleships would operate only in Norwegian waters. Admiral Scheer never returned to the Atlantic. In a sense, Jervis Bay's sacrifice helped prove a larger truth. Surface raiders could cause chaos, but they could be hunted and contained. Convoys that scattered survived. Escorts that fought, even hopelessly outmatched ones, bought the time that mattered. The convoy system worked even when the escort was a passenger liner with late 19th century guns and no armour. November 5, 1940. A converted emigrant liner, burning from bow to stern, still driving toward a pocket battleship with guns that cannot reach it. Her captain dead on the bridge with one arm torn away, having held his course until the last shell found him. 187 men going down with their ship in the freezing Atlantic darkness, and 32 merchant ships escaping into the night because one crew decided that 22 minutes was worth everything they had. Captain Fegen did not save his ship. He was never going to save his ship. He saved his convoy. He saved over 1,000 merchant seamen, and he proved that British naval courage did not require armour plate or heavy guns. It required only the willingness to stand between the enemy and the people you were sent to protect, and to hold that line until you could hold it no longer. HMS Jervis Bay held for 22 minutes. It was enough.